Charles, we've got an extremely exciting episode today. Lots going on in the world of Crowdsource the Truth. How are you there in your presidential library overseas?
My residential
Sorry.
library. It's okay. There's one thing I'm going to present in the subscriber only video, but I want to explain one thing at the outset that I think is going to be relevant to the story today. In 1988, when George H.W. Bush won election, which was tough, very few vice presidents, as Kamala Harris learned, go on to become president. So when he won the election, his chief of staff as vice president was working really hard to get him elected. And the day after the election, or shortly after the election, H.W. Bush fired him. And I didn't like H.W. Bush to begin with, and I didn't know then that I was related to him, or that he was related to me. But because Nick Brady was in as Treasury Secretary, they wanted to find a job for Craig Fuller. So Craig was sent up to New York to meet with me. And here is the letter that he sent me after the lunch, thanking me for my time, etc., because we were trying to think through what were good job opportunities for him. And my reaction in that lunch was utter disgust that that George H.W. Bush would be that fickle, that he would lead on his chief of staff, and then when he won election, just say, I'll shit can and get somebody new.
But wait a minute, why did he do that? If this guy was able to achieve that great goal, why fire him?
Maybe because Fuller knew things that H.W. Bush didn't want the world to. I don't know, but it was just it was an active deceit in my view. I mean, here's a guy who was working his ass off to get H.W. elected, and you reward him by firing. In one of your first acts in the transition. I didn't like that, and I don't like any part of the family with the last name Bush, not my relatives, but
not with
anyway,
not in a train, not in a plane, not with Not no way.
And I wouldn't want you anywhere near those people because your bullshit detector would be going, nonstop. You wouldn't be able to sleep. Ringing all 24/7.
We should explain to people why we've selected this today, Charles, because this is obviously based on Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, but you and I have been engaged in a really exciting investigation. I've been developing some new techniques that I've been telling you about, and last night we really had one of our first brainstorming sessions together. What were your feelings about that?
Well, I think you've harnessed tools that make it possible to do work that would take years if people could even connect the dots that you're able to connect so quickly. And hats off to you for doing that. To me, actually I really have become addicted to not working.
They say it's habit forming. I've heard that.
But it's really nice to have no deadline, nobody saying you got to do this or you got to do that and whatever. But that said, the tools that you've unlocked in this case and in other cases are tools that I could use in figuring out whether an investment is a good or a bad idea, and without employing anybody to help me on it. Whereas the old-fashioned way of doing it is the senior people we would work on so many things at once that you weren't given the latitude to do a deep dive on only one thing. You inevitably, as you rise in an investment bank, you're put into a management role and into a business development role. And those roles make it quite difficult to stay and do what I love, which is to be on the line of actual deal making or investment making and then harvesting. But with these tools, we were able, I think you were able to just go take a problem and figure out what questions to ask and then get the right answers and connect all the dots. And if I could summarize and just jump in, what I think has happened here with Tish James is Tish James, as we know, looking at George W. Bush, to pick on him. George W. Bush, by his own account, the morning after his 40th birthday, he writes about this. He was so outrageously drunk at his 40th birthday party in, I think, Colorado somewhere, that his wife, Laura, came to him and said, listen, you've got a simple decision to make. Do you want to be married to me, or do you want to be married to Jim Beam, which apparently was his drink of choice? And that, W claims, is the moment when he decided that he'd give up alcohol. But through 40 years of existence, maybe in his early years he wasn't drinking, the guy was out of control. And his business was not doing well at that time. And the people handling him got him into the oil business. And he was working, believe it or not, George W. Bush, the money that was financing his early wealth came from where? It came from the Harvard University Endowment.
Whoa.
And George Soros.
Holy crap.
Yeah. So, you that's why I bring it up. And so, and in the case of that example, which why I got to that was I was trying to figure out what GE would have had on George W. Bush to use as leverage to make sure that GE wasn't investigated the way it should have been investigated. And I figured this out in 2007, I think it was. So, without AI and without the power of this internet or these internets and databases, I was able to go in. Yeah, I was use those pneumatic tubes, push things around. But I was able to get the SEC documents, which are difficult to find, for various fundraising exercises. And I was able to piece this all together, that what George W. appears to have done back in after 1986, when he eventually got on the Harkin board, he got tired of the Harkin exercise, and friends came along and said, listen, why don't you be the general partner in a partnership that we're going to put together to buy the Texas Rangers? And the only problem was he didn't have the $500,000 in cash that he needed to finance that purchase. So he went to a local bank pledging Harkin shares to get that loan. The trouble with that was those Harkin shares had already been pledged to the company and should not have been used as security right as banks ultimately went bubble up. I was going to use a different word that begins with T. But so this mechanism of compromising people who were facing ruin, but otherwise were connected, is I think something that they do with people like Pete Buttigieg, who
like
there's no way
play.
there's no way Pete Buttigieg legitimately got a Rhodes Scholarship. I'm sorry. There's just no way. That man is dumber.
Yeah.
He is stupid, and he's not an athlete. That's what you're supposed to be, very smart and an athlete. So Buttigieg was on the Bill Clinton plan of getting a Rhodes Scholarship he didn't deserve. And look what happened with that. The second you hear, most people hear, oh, so-and-so is a Rhodes Scholar. My God, that's impressive.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so anyway, the Tish James story, the real Tish James story that I think you and I appreciated back when she ran for Attorney General, is that she's a big fat idiot, right? And
exactly.
It's not like, forget all these fine points about. I mean, the case that she brought against Donald Trump,
yeah,
her superior, it's ridiculous. And the case that Alvin Bragg brought against it's just absolutely preposterous and ridiculous, right? And it tells you that the people who make the decisions on prosecuting in New York they're not in the legal business. They're in the vendetta business. And remember, Tish ran a campaign in 2018. Everything we're going to talk about today, and then in the subscriber only section, she knew. So just like Barack Obama, who graduated from Columbia in theory in 1981, the first 5 years of Barack Obama's life remain a mystery. We don't really know who he was working for.
His
we don't really know what he
was.
Professional life. And similarly with Tish James, she gets out of in theory, and I haven't seen a graduation degree. I haven't seen her transcript. I haven't seen her application to college, or to law school for that matter, or to Columbia graduate school, which she also went to. She gets out of the City University of New York system somewhere, And it says in her Wikipedia and other biographies that she started work at the Legal Aid Society. So maybe she did that before she was a lawyer, in which case what I'm about to say is even worse. Or maybe we just simply don't know what she was doing from 1981 or whenever it was that she got out of college. I think it was 81 until 80. Is it 87?
She was a public defender in the Legal Aid Society, so she was an attorney. And also, that Legal Aid Society, Charles, is terrible. I've actually, dealt with it when all these lawsuits started. That's what they told me. So 2003 General Election Voter Guide talks about her working as a public defender.
You don't work as a public defender prior to going to law school. So the question is, what was she doing immediately after college, other than egregious mortgage fraud? Egregious.
Allegedly.
Right?
Yes.
No.
Pretty clear.
Egregious. Yes. I mean,
I agree.
We have on the one hand, we have on the same day, the article that you wrote, not the most recent one, but the one before it, the same exact day, under oath, she swears that she is both the wife and the daughter of her father on the same day. I mean, that's not something that, when you, in my 20s, I first bought a property on April 15th, 1983. And it was a big deal to me to be to own 25 acres of land with a house on it as a punk, as a 27-year-old punk. And I remember that closing even now vividly. We had to have a certified check for 20% of the purchase price. The owner took back a note. We had all kinds of things I had to pay, a portion of taxes and this and that. And the real estate broker was very happy, so happy that he took us out to lunch. And I told him at lunch that he said, "This is great. You've achieved a major milestone." I said, "Yeah, and I'm going to try to buy one of these every year." And he looked at me like I was crazy. But anyway, so you don't go into a mortgage to a property closing and say, as somebody who wants to be a lawyer, okay, in this meeting, I'm going to say that I'm your wife, and in this meeting, I'm going to say I'm your daughter, right? I mean, that's just ridiculous. And Abby Lowell can fulminate all he wants, but if you actually did it, if you have pieces of paper that say that's what she did, she should not have been able to get a place in law school. That is bold fraud, right? You don't say, all right, well, what we're going to do here is if this law school that creates social justice warriors, the law is all bullshit, and we're going to pick the people who break the law and then give them the credentials and make them attorney general. I mean, that is not the way how the system is meant to work. But yet it seems that is the way it works. Hillary Clinton's whole career is based on a lie. So is Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren lied about her heritage, knowingly lied about her heritage, I would argue, and accepted a tenured law position at Harvard, destroying the credibility of Harvard Law School as far as I'm concerned. She's probably still getting a pension from Harvard Law School. Okay? And here's another case of it with the fat idiot, Tish James, who, look at the amount of airtime that fat idiot has gotten, going after Trump.
She's crazy when you listen to her talk now, right? She's like a preacher, she's just like riling up the crowd, not as a legal kind of person, just as like a gang leader or something.
Like an Al Sharpton. But, she's ridiculous. And beyond that, she's fundraising now off of this. She's raising money. She's already got 10 million or some portion of the 10 million Hochul, I would argue, illegally allocated to her and others to defend against Trump-related lawsuits. But she's also out there fundraising. She's shameless. And somebody, I think, actually, Ed Martin just did an interview with Tucker Carlson, which I watched snippets of it. It's pretty good. And this guy, Ed Martin, is very good, I think. And he's saying that the public would have difficulty understanding just how rotten the justice system is. I'm one of the members of the public who would not have any trouble understanding that. Yeah. That's what I believe.
Now, Charles, you're just referencing something that I think we should go into for a minute, because it hasn't been widely discussed publicly. This notion that Letitia James, it's been widely publicized that she signed a mortgage in which it said Robert James and Letitia James, his wife, Joel Gilbert, Sam Antar, or even Laura Ingram, have been talking about that. But one of the documents that you and I found last night that has also been published in the Gateway Pundit today is the deed from that same property. It's pretty decimated, but we can see right here it says his Daughter. So this was presented to the mortgage company at the same time as the other document. And that's what you're talking about, where it's, basically making two contradictory declarations in the same transaction, right?
Reductio ad absurdum, I think, is the Latin phrase. No, it's ridiculous. You can't, I mean, it's one thing if you're talking, it'd be bad if the parties were, let's just say, high school graduates who, were just had no experience and no pretenses,
non-attorneys,
and some shyster comes along at Cadillac Funding and says, "Listen, I can get you into this slum, for a modest down payment. All you just don't even read these documents carefully. Just sign what I put in front of you." Okay, people do that. People are really stupid. Fortunately, my mother and father took me aside at a very young age and said, under no circumstances are you ever to sign a document unless you understand it.
Right. The other thing is, they're saying this 24-year-old Letitia James, they're acting like she was 14 or something. She's an adult responsible for her own actions. Now, the statute of limitations on something like this might have run. I don't know. We should also add, I'm not an attorney. You're not an attorney. Nothing we're saying here is legal advice. This is our opinion based on facts and evidence in the public domain. A lot of people might look at this evidence and come to different conclusions than we have, but this is, documents that have been filed and are, in most cases, available on public databases like ACRIS, right?
Well, and let me also get into that point that you're making there. In my business training, the attitude, and not just because I didn't go to law school, and I actually foolishly wanted to go to law school, but when I was in college, we were always told that lawyers are going to have strong opinions, and often they disagree. But it's the principals that make the final decision. It's not the lawyers. We don't want a world, because most lawyers are very bad business people, and most lawyers are very poor with numbers and understanding of finance. So our view was always that we would listen to lawyers. Often we'd have different teams of lawyers if it was a complicated case, and one person would argue this and another person would argue that. And in the end, you, the individual, the principal, have to make the decision. The way Andrew Weissman and the mainstream press, what passes for the legacy media would like to have it, is you bring in a legal expert and you let the legal expert tell you the settled law. Well, there are precedents. And there are statutes, but the externalities, the context is always changing. We're always learning new information. And so when you get into the question of what this future attorney general was doing at age 24, signing this paperwork, I would argue that if I were running a law school, and I will never run a law school, I would certainly rescind the law degree of anybody who did something like this, because this is outrageous. This is not this is not the way the system is. This is disrespecting the legal system.
Yeah. This is organized crime, basically.
Yeah. And how many other instances are there of this?
Well, there's many. We found a lot just last night. I think, Charles, we're not even going to be able to go through all of this in one show, because first of all, it's so much stuff. And second of all, we've just begun to scratch the surface. Some of the things that we've found, and even today have found more about, I think we'll do our best to get into it. But what are your thoughts about that?
I just don't know how much time left we have for this
No, I mean,
segment.
well, right
But
here, we've only got about 5 minutes, but when we get into the
yeah,
sponsor exclusive segment on
sure.
subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, people who are already on Odyssey will be able to join us as well. People can also join on crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com. And of course, people who subscribe to me on X will get to see this, but there's so many layers to this stinky onion that is Letitia James. You know, it's an organized crime operation as far as I can see. And I just think that even if we spent 2 hours on it, it wouldn't be enough.
Yeah. I would go a bit broader and say that it's not just Tish James, it's the Democrat Party and it's the leadership, the rhino portion of the Republican Party. You know, is Tish James the best person that the Democrats could have put to run as Attorney General? She's the deepest, the strongest person on their bench. I mean, going back to Pete Buttigieg, he's out there now thinking that the ground is open for him to run in 2027, 2028. You know, in most monarchies, the court jester doesn't ever become a king. I mean, this guy was a really bad Secretary of Transportation, right? He did nothing other than, he got a big pot of gold out of Congress that he shouldn't have gotten. And he probably, when we get into looking at that closely, channeled it maybe back to himself, but certainly back to his political patrons. He's an idiot. And yet, the people behind him think that they could push him up because he'll be the first openly gay president with kids. He thinks that's why he thinks he can win.
For sure. We definitely
Absolutely.
need that. That's representative of America broadly, I'm sure. Now, Charles, we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to do something. This is my opinion, but this is quite explosive. Sure. And, you've taught me a lot. I have to thank you, Charles. Everybody knows you're an expert in complex financial matters and also just in kind of generally navigating through tricky stuff. And you've told us many times about Ortel's first rule, which is to enter the name of a person in quotes, and then fraud, and see what you come up with. Now, one of the problems I've run into with that piece of advice is that so much of my research has been into, not because I came to this on my own, but just because I've been such a victim of lawfare, so much of my research has been into judges who we have questions about. And the problem I was having is when you search for a judge with fraud, you just find a million cases that the judge has ruled upon. So I've come up with a slight, variation on the theme, Charles, and it's to put in the judge's name with the word scandal. And guess who just came up when I did that, Charles? It's Judge Thomas M. Rose of the U.S. District Court of the Southern District of Ohio, who had to withdraw from a case that could block Medicare's historic drug price negotiation program because of all the stocks that he owns. So this was a scandal for this judge, and we're going to get into talking about some more evidence that we've discovered that might point to this judge having a real long history of scandalous behavior.
Wow. Great find.
Thank you. So we've got just about a minute left. Anything you want to add before we make our way over to the First Amendment forum?
Yeah, people need to understand that Jason with Crowdsource the Truth is a pioneer in a different way of actually performing journalism. And there's a lot of information that can come to light and be now analyzed very quickly. People need to understand that the landscape is always shifting. The fraudsters are not out there saying, look, I have all this evidence of fraud that I'd like to supply you so that you can get to the right conclusion. No, they're trying to hide evidence. And the grounds are constantly shifting. And this broadcast is made on a certain time and a certain date when the facts are known to us in a certain way. The landscape is likely to change and evolve until we get to the point where indictments are handed down, and even after that point, as juries consider issues and judges weigh in on decisions of innocence and guilt and sentencing. So there's a big stink in the United States and in the West with a lot of crooked politicians and dynastic political families. And we'll get into that more in the paid session.
Absolutely. And Charles, thank you for those kind words. I'm not too often tooting my own horn. You're very kind with compliments to the art department, but I have to say, Muppet Robert James one of my all-time best. I really like it.
Yeah, no, it really is.
So,
We got to get this artwork into a book somehow.
yeah, I mean, I was thinking about making some prints and stuff. You know, there's a lot of pressure on me in terms of all these cases. It's a filing things and traveling around. And I told you I had this dental surgery the other day. It's just the first of several different things. So if people appreciate the show and this research and the work that I'm doing, I really hope that they will become sponsors on crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com or subscribestar.com or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, or of course by following me on X at JG_CSTT and becoming a subscriber. We'll be back in just 5 minutes. We've got some mind-blowing, incredible original research to share with people, and we'll be right back.